All right, I think we're at 5 minutes after, so I'm going to go ahead. Please keep filling this out. Again, you can just visit this website listed at the top, menti.com, and use the code here or follow the links that Amber's been dropping into the chat for you because we want to know who's joining us. Fill out those first 3 questions, and then there's a sort of pause slide there in the polling. If you can just pause there, and then we'll come back to this at the end to get a sense of what you've learned and what you're hoping to do moving forward. So thank you all. While you finish filling that out, I think we're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves. So I'm Megan Jennings. I'm a research scientist at San Diego State University. I'm part of the team that's been working on the Montane Forest Conservation Strategy, and I'm going to be one of the folks helping walk you through the strategy today. Joining me to help walk through the strategy are Sarah. You want to introduce yourself, Sarah?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Hennessy. I'm an associate ecologist for the Forest Service. I sit on the Cleveland National Forest in San Diego, but I work across all 4 national forests across Southern California. And those are the Cleveland, the Angeles, the San Bernardino, and the Los Padres.
All right. And then also carrying the load with us today is going to be Nicole Molinari.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Molinari, and I've been working on the strategy for quite some time now, along with Sarah, Amber, and Megan. And I serve as the province ecologist for Southern California and work side by side with Sarah. Happy to be here with all of you today.
Thanks. And then we've got Amber.
Good afternoon, everyone. Amber Paris. I'm the founder and executive director of the Climate Science Alliance. And on behalf of our whole team, we're just really thankful that you took the time to join us today. And we're excited to share this information and to have this conversation with you. So thanks for being here.
Great, thanks. So what we're going to do today is we're going to give you a preview of the strategy. I know I saw in the registration people who have been with us since the beginning, maybe some newer names who don't know a whole lot about the strategy. So we're excited you chose to join us today. I know there are a lot of things going on right now that federal employees might not be joining us because it's a day of mourning for President Carter. And then, of course, many folks within Southern California are currently affected by fires. So if you're out there, stay safe. And for anybody who hasn't been able to join, we are recording this and we'll share this. So anybody who wasn't able to join us today will have an opportunity to view the presentation after the fact. So I wanted to share that. Stay safe out there. Okay, so let's see who's joining us today. So it looks like we've had a good number of folks join. If you've just logged on to the webinar, you can visit this website, menti.com, and type in this code right here. Amber's been dropping the link into the chat too if you want to do it on your browser, or you can just do it on your phone. But it looks like we have a lot of folks from San Diego County and Orange County. LA, so hope you guys in LA are holding strong out there. A lot of craziness going on. Some folks from San Bernardino and Riverside, and outside of California, elsewhere in California. So thank you all, Santa Barbara, and even some folks from Baja California. So thank you, bienvenido. Thanks for joining us today. Excited to have so many people interested in the work that we've been doing over the last few years. All right, let's go to the next question. If you are filling this out, please just do the first 3 questions and then pause there. The other 3 are for the back end of the presentation here. So it looks like we have a really good mix of folks. Not surprisingly, not as many folks from federal government today as you all are on an official day off. So for those 10% who are joining us, thanks for taking the time to join us on the day off. A lot of state government folks and nonprofits, some folks from academic, quite a few tribal folks. Wonderful. Great to see you all here. So thanks for joining us. This is great to know who's with us. And then this is the one I was really interested in. What do you know about the conservation strategy? So great. A lot of folks who don't know much at all. We're going to give you a rundown and talk about what's in the strategy, how you can potentially use it. Sounds like some of you who maybe have heard about it but don't know a whole lot, we're going to dig in there. And for those of you who've read it, but maybe haven't used it yet, hopefully you'll find some pathways to help you get started with it. And we're available to help you with that. And really excited to start learning from that 13% of you who are actively using it. So thank you for jumping in and getting going on something that is just fresh, hot off the presses and freshly released this past summer. All right, so I'm going to switch over here And Sarah's going to kick us off to tell you a little bit about the strategy.
Thank you, Megan. So as you may know, the Southern Montane Forest Project has been around since about 2020. And our main purpose has been to bring focus and attention and resources for the purpose of advancing forest management across Southern California. This webinar is primarily going to cover a conservation strategy. It's a major project that we recently released, and it includes a number of resources and tools that are intended to support forest managers who are, and other practitioners who are seeking to adapt to changing conditions in forests, and to help them figure out how they can support and increase forest resilience to severe disturbances such as wildfire. Next slide. Just a word of background, like many areas in the American West, we're seeing significant forest losses that are largely occurring through this process of tree mortality and wildfire. We have had major forest mortality events occur in Southern California in the last 20 years. The images on this slide document a disturbance cycle that kicked off in 1999 with a couple of years of drought. And then after that, we experienced one of the most severe outbreaks of Western pine beetle up to that time. These photos are from San Diego, but the drought and the outbreak was felt across SoCal. And then after the outbreak and tree mortality event, then we experienced severe fires that included the Cedar Fire in 2003 and the Chariot Fire in 2007. So we are seeing that as temperatures warm, as drought frequency and severity increases under climate change, we're also seeing the cycles of disturbance intensifying. Next slide. These changes, the intensification of disturbance cycles has been occurring throughout California, but we think they became impactful in Southern California maybe 10 or 15 years ahead of the rest of the state, including ahead of the Sierra Nevada and other major portions of California. One study estimated that in Southern California, we have already lost about 14% of our tree cover. That was since 1985. And that was the highest relative rate of loss that this study measured statewide. Part of the reason why this is so impactful in Southern California is likely because a lot of our forest is limited to sky islands. These are isolated high elevations across the transverse and the peninsular ranges. We have a lot of them, but they tend to be kind of small and fragmented. In terms of where the montane forests are that we address in the strategy, we've generally been defining montane as being above 4,000 feet, and the strategy focuses on both conifer and oak-dominated forest types. Next slide. I'd like to talk just for a minute about the overall goals of the project. We have a strong focus on trying to retain forest as we go into this warmer and less predictable future, including a future with increased amounts of fire. So this project has a very strong focus on climate adaptation throughout. We also have a strong focus on highlighting and defining some of the ecological and social factors that distinguish us from the Sierra and the rest of California. And that includes our high variability in precipitation, our Santa Ana wind events, and some of the differences in management that we experience down here. This project also has a strong focus across all land ownerships. And that was very deliberate from the inception of the project. our overarching goal is to work to engage forest managers and practitioners across the region, both to collectively come to an agreement about what the vulnerabilities and what some of the challenges are that we're all facing together, but then to strategically work together on the opportunities that we have to advance forest management and to increase forest resilience. Next slide. And so we have designed the project to incorporate collaboration from the beginning. We have an advisory group, and since 2020, we've been holding workshops and community meetings and giving scientific presentations and giving tribal meetings throughout. One of our major early efforts was a questionnaire of practitioner perspectives to help gather information on how we might best think about overcoming barriers to implementation. And more recently, we've been working to take the partnerships that we've been developing to identify and advance joint projects that we can that are focused on management implementation in different key geographies across the region. Next slide. And with that introduction, I'd like to begin pivoting towards going into the meat of the strategy itself. It is a three-pronged strategy. The first prong is focused at landscape scale, and this is a prioritization framework. Prioritization is a major push across the entire state, and so we are helping to advance that in our region. The second prong is focused at project level to help managers develop projects that are climate adapted, and the third prong is focused on post-fire landscapes and restoration of those landscapes. So now I would like to hand it back over to Megan to take us through the first prong.
Sarah? Okay, so how do we prioritize forest resilience at the landscape scale? Well, we decided to start with a process that thought about the different things and accounted for the different things that affect our ability to really help build resilience in our montane forests. And so we thought about that in three different ways and by looking at sort of three different pieces of key information. So the first is the exposure to threats. How exposed is the landscape, is the forest to different threats from things that we don't have a lot of control over? So these are really static features on the landscape. So we can think about being as strategic as possible with the actions that we take to manage the forest and protect it. The second piece is to identify vulnerabilities. What are those things that we can change if we have departed from historic fire returned intervals? We have way too long time periods in between fires. We can put fire on the ground. Or if the forest is too dense, we can thin the forest, right? Those are vulnerabilities that we can mitigate. And then finally, thinking about where are there priority assets, resources, places, things that are important that we want to protect in the forest so we can make sure those get highlighted, and think about the combination of those three things so we can be strategic and think about where those treatments and forest management practices will have the greatest effect. Now, what you actually do on the landscape is probably going to be affected by how much you can really make a change, right? So are you able to resist change? Is it in a pretty good state? And maybe you just need to do some maintenance of the current state of the forest. Or maybe you need to do a little bit more work to mitigate a high level of vulnerabilities, like doing that stand thinning, the density thinning. So you might want to do that to accommodate the change that is coming as we continue to warm and dry. Or in places that are already at high risk and they're expected to be very exposed to things like drought and high temperatures, then maybe we think about transforming to a different state. So it might not be the current kind of forest that it is, but it could still be some sort of forest and still provide the same kind of ecosystem services and benefits that that forest would provide. And so, you know, the other thing is that we also are pragmatic. In some places, we might not take action. Sometimes it's not possible. There's steep slopes, areas that you can't get to. And so how can we take the information about what the landscape looks like and then transition that into what types of response strategies we might want to take on the landscape. So let me walk you through what this looks like in practice. So to initially conduct the framework, we did a pilot analysis working with the folks in the San Bernardino Mountains and the San Jacinto Mountains. And this is because, we wanted to test it out in one place, and we're currently working to expand to a broader landscape. So if this isn't you, if you're down here, you're up here, don't worry, we're coming your way. But what I'm going to show you is just this initial analysis we've created. So we think about exposure to threats. And so we're calling these, rather than thinking about how much of a threat we have, we want to think about how much buffering do we have from those threats. So we're calling this climate adapted refugia. What kinds of refugial conditions or conditions that buffer the change to come or change that we're already experiencing and allow the forest to adapt and change. And so we think about this from 3 different domains, thinking about the threats of climate change, the threats of fire, and the impacts of humans on this landscape, because there's a lot of us here. There's 24 million people in Southern California. So the climate adapted refugia, it's just where those multiple threats from these 3 domains are relatively low compared to the broader region. And again, these are those stressors we have little ability to change in the short term. So we looked at the literature and thought about which threats are most impactful, and really drought is, and how much water is available to the forest is one of the most impactful. And so that's what we looked at from the climate perspective. What is the change in aridity, how dry the forest is going to be, and in the frequency of prolonged droughts. So we had 2 different metrics that look at both the historic condition and some of the potential for change in the future. From the fire perspective, we looked at those features of the landscape we can't change. So it's a lot about topography. Southwest slopes are typically warmer, drier, and they burn hotter or faster. Depending on where you are on the slope, if you're on a steep slope rather than on a valley bottom or at a ridge line, the fire is going to burn faster uphill, for example. And then, of course, as we're seeing today and many other of our fires in the past, places where we have Santa Ana winds with high velocity, we have high potential for fire. And then finally, human pressure, where we have a high degree of impervious surface. Sometimes that makes it harder for the forest to adapt, and there's additional effects that come along with that. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, we put those pieces all together, and what you see here is this map of refugial capacity. So how much is the landscape buffered? Well, the areas that are green are the most buffered. They're the highest capacity for absorbing that change and having forests persist into the future, and the areas in brown are lower. So these green areas, high elevation, some of our most important forest areas, those are going to be more buffered. So that's good news. And they're the areas where we think we're most likely to maintain forests in the future, and that can help us decide where we want to do the work and what kind of work needs to be done. So the next piece is to think about what those vulnerabilities are. So we did the piece that's sort of static to the landscape, thinking about sort of ecologically and thinking about processes and using data and information to gather that information. But here, we wanted to work directly with managers to figure out what are the vulnerabilities that you face every day. So the vulnerabilities are just weakness and protection of the forest or an area that's important to you. As I said, they have that potential to be changed, and they can be flexible and identified sub-regionally. We've been doing this with workshops across the landscape so that you can be really specific to the places that you work. So this is an example of what's come out of the workshops we've been holding. This is my messy handwriting. And then this gets translated over to, we work to match this up with some data that can help us address these vulnerabilities, help us map them on the landscape and see where they are. So things we've heard really commonly and we put into this initial pilot analysis are things about fuels. How much wood do we have in tons per acre? What's the density of the stand? How thick is the forest? What is the fire return interval departure? How many fires have we missed? How thick is that forest likely to be from that, those missed fires that would have been beneficial? Ignitions, where are hotspots of ignitions that create an increased risk of fire. And then finally, human pressure. We know oftentimes with humans comes the pressure of, people starting fires or just the, bringing in of invasive plants, a variety of things come with people. And so we added all these pieces together, just like the last example. And here, what we see is a composite of vulnerability. So higher vulnerabilities are in this deeper red color, and lower ones are in sort of the light orange or peach. And so what we've got here is areas that are have greater vulnerabilities. Often they're nearer communities, and areas that have experienced a long time without fire. So then the final component is or the second component is that we put these two pieces together and we say, well, where do these match up? And so where we have high refugia and high vulnerability, those are areas where we want to accommodate that change and make quite a bit of impact by taking on forest treatment. So those are some of these areas in purple. And you can see some of the other colors will map onto those other strategies, response strategies that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, we identify those priority assets. So these are areas of ecological, cultural, ecosystem service values. Again, we do this sub-regionally, and we overlay it with the areas of greatest management need. So quickly, I'll run through these. We had interest in watershed and water supply, where we have human communities like our WUI, where we have sensitive species, and where we have recreation facilities and uses, because those are areas we want to protect. And when we lay those on and we pull out the areas where we want to accommodate that future change, we can potentially phase those and say the areas with the most priority resources, we want to protect those first. So there's a little bit of red here, but you can see a whole lot of orange where we might want to get to those first. Okay, I took a little bit too long, but I'm going to pass it back to Sarah to sort of show you how we translate from those response strategies to actually coming up with some tactics to do that on the ground.
Thanks, Megan. So you've seen the prioritization framework that we developed, which is a customized process that is implemented through a combination of workshops and then behind the scenes processing. The second prong of the strategy is focused at project level and is meant to assist the development of individual projects for specific locations on the ground. Next slide. So for project scale planning, the strategy recommends increased use of the adaptation workbook approach. This is an established approach. The strategy that we're releasing outlines the steps of this process and provides a case study from the region. This is a 5-step process. It addresses both the challenges and the opportunities posed by climate change, and then takes managers through the process of considering how their management tactics should be modified to address climate impacts in their project area. To support the use of this process, we developed an adaptation menu to guide managers through options for forest management. And this is a product, it's a pretty major product. It is based on existing menus. We do have a menu of management options for California forests that is pictured in this slide and was released by the USDA California Climate Hub. We have also drawn on an existing tribal climate adaptation menu. And from both of these existing menus, we have brought in many of the ideas and then tailored them in a way to make them really relevant and useful for Southern California. Next slide. This is a graphic that shows the overall structure of the menu. It's a menu that has 3 levels that start at the top level with overarching strategies. And then there are lower levels that dial down all the way to management tactics, you know, your on the ground, boots on the ground actions. At this top level, we've identified 9 different response strategies, and we have organized them in terms of the 3 response strategies that Megan laid out. So where are the areas on the landscape where you're going to try to resist change? Where are the areas where you think you can do a moderate amount of accommodating change? where are those areas where climate exposure is so great, managers need to be thinking about helping their forest transform to some new form. And the overarching strategies in the menu range from, the first one is focused on supporting better community engagement. The second one is focused on dealing with severe disturbances. That's where a lot of our guidance regarding severe fire is contained. But if you go all the way down into the menu and look at strategies 8 and 9, these are strategies where we really tried to focus on coming up with some concrete guidance for managers who are faced with that situation of high climate exposure. And what can we do in these locations? So the adaptation menu provides a range of options. Next slide. I would like to walk you through the menu. We have a brand new interactive online format that is available to all users. And I just like to acknowledge this is thanks to Diane Terry at Climate Science Alliance and Diane Foote at San Diego State University. I do not have the skills to make something like this. So on the landing page, you'll see our 9 strategies are laid out. These are all clickable. And then across the top are buttons that lay out a couple of filtering options. So you can look at all 9 strategies at once, or if you know that you're in an accommodation kind of situation, you can click on the accommodation button. And that will take you to you're starting to filter down now to look at a smaller number of relevant options for your particular situation. And so from here, I'm going to go down through the levels of the strategy. So right now we're looking at the strategies, and I'm going to select strategy number 2, which is the one that's focused on severe disturbances. So if you click on strategy number 2, next slide, then in that right-hand panel, the next level of the menu appears. And so these are the mid-level approaches, and we've kind of put those mid-level guidances into categories. So we've got one that is focused on wildfire. We've got one that's focused on what do you do on portions of the landscape where you're worried about reburns, something that we're more and more concerned about. So this helps you dial down into the options that you're interested in. And then for each of these approaches, there is another layer underneath them. So for the green tab in the bottom right, strategy 2 details. If you click on that button, that pulls up the lowest level of the menu. And so you'll see that we're in approach 2.1, severe disturbances, wildfire. And this is where, for the first time, you can see our lowest level of tactics. And so these are tactics. These are the most detailed sets of guidance that we are able to provide to managers based on the existing literature and from information that we solicited from managers and practitioners across the region. When you're in the tactics, if you click on, next slide, please. So under this approach, we've got 6 tactics, and under each of the tactics, you'll see a brown button at the top of each window. And if you click on that, next slide, then it pops up more information. So this is the meat of the menu. And when you look at this in the PDF form, it's 50 pages, but This interactive menu format is meant to help managers dial down quickly and just find the information that they need. So we're hoping that that this online format will be useful. Next slide. And then going back to the tactics, on each one of these 6 tabs, you'll see that at the bottom of the tab, there are a couple of, next slide, please, symbols and categories. And these are additional filtering options. So I'm going to take you through these very quickly. Next slide. Returning to the landing page, this is the first slide that I showed you. Down at the bottom, there are 2 yellow buttons, one for exploring tactics by management topic and one by project activity. These are both filtering approaches. Next slide. So if you click on one of those, it brings up a set of panes where on the top left, you can choose a topic. And here, next slide, we've clicked on partnerships and you can choose a strategy. We have clicked on strategy 2 again. And then in the right-hand pane, it gives you just those approaches and tactics that are focused on partnerships and focused on mitigating severe disturbance. So these are some of the filtering tools that are available to help managers quickly move to their topics of interest. Next slide. Oh, and one more. This gives you an idea of what we mean by management topics and activities. So on the left with the topics, next slide. The topics are focused on some of those hot button topics that we're all thinking about currently. So that includes biodiversity and wildlife habitat. It includes carbon storage. It includes forest health. So by clicking on one of these, it will pull up just those approaches and tactics that that apply to each of those topics. Similarly, for activities, this is for managers who have a thinning question, or they have a prescribed fire question, or a grazing question. This is the place where they can go to filter out and find those bits of guidance quickly. Next slide. And again, and one more time. And so that is my very quick tour of the menu. And now I'm going to pivot and hand it over to Nicole to take us through the third prong of the strategy.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to share with you the third application of the strategy, and it focuses on how to think about forested landscapes following fire. And specifically, we'll be focusing on identifying areas and strategies for reforestation. Next slide, please, Megan. Thank you. So we hope to get out in front of large fires, but in cases where that's not possible, which seems like that's a common thing these days, we need to have a process in place for evaluating recovery potential and identifying areas for restoration. So the Post-Fire Restoration Framework, which is a general technical report that has been published, it's on the left side of the slide. It was developed a few years ago, and it's a flexible framework that can be applied to a diversity of landscapes. Here, of course, we'll be focusing on its application to montane forests. So the framework focuses on using mapped information about the burn perimeter to answer some really important questions. So I have those questions up for you right now. First off, did the fire improve or maintain ecological condition? And I'm pulling out improve and maintain because oftentimes people don't think about wildfire within that context. Did it do any good on the landscape? And the answer oftentimes is yes. We oftentimes focus on the second part of this question, which is, did fire degrade ecological condition? I think most people's minds go to that second thing. Where are we going to need to fix things? And so this is a really important question that helps us think holistically about needs within these burned landscapes. The second question that we ask is, do other factors like non-native species threaten forest resiliency and stability? And third, we ask, is reforestation feasible given current or future conditions? And here we're really thinking about climate change and the ability of forests to persist in areas where they used to thrive. Next slide, please. So these three questions that I just shared with you, they partition the forested landscape into three outcomes, or you can kind of think of it as three bins. The first bin or outcome are areas where restoration is not needed and we expect natural recovery to occur on its own. And I will say in the post-fire restoration assessments I've done to date, most of the landscape, thankfully, falls out in this category or in this outcome. The second outcome focuses on areas where natural recovery is unlikely and restoration, in this case reforestation, is likely to be needed. And here's how it's distinguished from that third outcome. And we think not only is restoration needed, but we think it's feasible to reforest to the pre-fire condition given the current conditions on the landscape. And outcome three, again, is similar to outcome two, in the fact that we need to do some restoration, but in this case, restoring to a pre-fire condition may not be feasible because of climate change or other stressors. So in this case, we need to really be considering new desired conditions. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, this is a mapping exercise and it utilizes publicly available data layers. And we use information about the capacity for natural regeneration. We use information about specially designated areas like wilderness, forest stressors like climate exposure. We can pull in the climate refugia map that Megan introduced earlier. And we can pull in information about ecosystem services to really help with prioritization. So in the Montane conservation strategy, we use the 2020 Bobcat fire as a case study. And the Bobcat fire burned in the San Gabriel Mountains. It was 120 acres or thereabouts. And the fire perimeter is outlined in black, and the blue within that represents the montane forested area. So that accounted for about 25% of the Bobcat fire. And for today's discussion, we're going to be focusing our analysis only on these forested areas. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so let's jump into outcomes. So first, we identify areas where fire may have improved or maintained the ecological condition of the forest. And we do this by looking at areas that burned at low to moderate severity. So in this map, the darker green color are areas that burned at low severity, transitioning into yellow, which are areas that burned at moderate severity. And these lower severity classes have had some tree mortality, but there's still green trees present to contribute cones and seeds to regrow the forest. So the majority of the Bobcat fire did burn in these low to moderate severity classes. And in these areas, we don't just walk away. We should be considering utilizing prescribed fire within the next decade to maintain forest conditions and to work and continue to do some of the good work that may have been started with the fire itself. We should also be monitoring for non-natives and actively treating weed infestations. And lastly, there should be monitoring for regeneration, and that's especially true in areas that burned at moderate severity where 25 to 50% of the trees may have been removed. Next slide, please. So next we move on to areas where the fire was likely to negatively impact the forest. So we identify these areas by looking for large patches. We tend to classify large high severity patches as patches greater than 100 acres. And this means that there are very few trees that are remaining within these high severity large patches to contribute seed and cones to the next generation or to regrowing that forest. So you can see these high severity patches in the map. They're red polygons. They look a little bit small on my screen right now. But overall, within the Bobcat fire, there was less than 25% of the forested area that burned at high severity. Next slide, please. So we can then evaluate whether restoration is feasible. And to do this, we can draw from a number of products, but I think it's kind of cool to highlight the Climate Refugia product that we developed as part of the strategy. Megan introduced this product earlier. So I'm going to show you an example of utilizing this layer for reforestation rather than, well, for prioritization of reforestation. But we're going to have to zoom in a little closer. So the yellow box that you're seeing on the map indicates a part of the forest that we're going to zoom in on. So next slide. I think Megan's ready to see it. There we go. Okay, so this is the zoomed in map, and the color scale that you're seeing from red to blue represents the Climate Refugia mapping product. And the red polygons, again, they kind of look like polka dots, very small on the screen right now, but they represent the high severity burned areas. So for this outcome, outcome number 2, we want to focus on areas that burned at high severity and are within climate refugia. So you can see there's a blue arrow pointing to one of these as an example. Next slide, please. You can also use landscape position like north-facing slopes that we know are more mesic to inform areas where reforestation is likely to be feasible. And of course, the final point here is that these are areas where planting to a pre-fire condition in terms of species composition and location are most likely to be successful. Next slide. Okay, and so lastly, this is outcome 3, and these are areas where restoration is needed, but may be infeasible due to climate or other stressors. So like before, we're looking for large areas that burned at high severity, so those red polygons, but this time those high severity patches are dry and have high climate exposure, which could lead to high seedling mortality. So these are areas where we should consider new desired conditions or novel ways to increase planting success. And so I think the Montane strategy and what Sarah just talked about and the use of the adaptation menu is a great guide to make decisions about these landscapes. And so I went in and pulled out a couple of tactics from the adaptation menu to show how we might think about these forested areas that need reforestation and but also have high climate exposure. So the 2 that I pulled out focus on planting in mesic microsites and also planting higher proportions of drought tolerant species. Next slide, please. All right, so after going through this process, the forested landscapes are binned into the 3 outcomes that we've talked about a couple of times now, and we also have acres associated with each of those. And now we can move on to moving into the field, ground truthing, right? This is a spatial analysis, so we need to get out onto the landscape and evaluate how this landscape looks. It's a great opportunity to get in the field for field trips and discussions with specialists and to start the reforestation planning process. And with that, I'm going to be passing it on to Megan for some Q&A. Megan, I think you're still muted.
Thank you. Do we want to pause there, do some Q&A, and then Sarah, we can do a wrap up at the end with the time we have left? Great. Then I'm going to stop sharing this. And I know we had a question in the Q&A. One of them was about some folks who wanted to see the data that we were using. And yes, we've worked directly with some folks to share the data for that pilot area initially, but we are working together to create sort of a platform, put this all together, start working on the landscape scale, and then provide a platform for folks to view that together. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to comment, or Nicole, on sort of some next steps there.
Apologies, I was looking at the Q&A, but in terms of next steps, we are hoping to, we're in the process of developing a platform using the EAMS tool by Conservation Biology Institute, which will be a publicly available platform that makes the prioritization more available for the kinds of applications that you're asking for, to be able to take an existing prioritization and to take it apart, to look at the different levels, to turn pieces of it off and on and see what the effects are to the prioritization scheme. So that is a product that is under development and will be available, we hope, on Databasin in the next, say, year or so. Do you think that timeline is about right, Megan?
I think so. And I think the other thing I'd add is if you're interested in it now, please reach out to us. I mean, we're working with, right, we're we're building the plane as we fly it. And so we're welcoming passengers on our flying plane that we're building. And so if you want to try some things out, please reach out to us. It's just that while it's in development, we like to work closely with folks so you can understand where we are, where there might be limitations as we work on developing it. Great. And then one of the other questions was about who are we working with when we developed, the examples that we've created. And I think we've been engaged with a really large number of folks over time. Of course, in some of these areas, we've been working really closely with the Forest Service. But for example, in the San Bernardino and San Jacinto Mountains, watersheds are really important. So a lot of folks representing interests in water management, even if it's not, right in the forest, what happens on the forest affects what happens down below. We've engaged with a wide range of tribal partners who've reviewed different components of the strategy in that area. Serrano and Cahuilla folks have participated in providing input, but worked with Kumeyaay and Luiseño, some Chumash folks as well, to sort of talk about what some of the components of the strategy and that adaptation menu in particular, customizing that was something that we did through a tribally focused workshop. And so, lots of folks, other academics, we've had our technical advisory group engage. Am I forgetting any? We've had lots and lots. It's hard to remember every single group of folks who we've worked with, but it's been very collaborative.
I think there's one more question in there, Megan, about maybe seed collection.
Yeah.
Well, and
let me ask the question and then I'll let you go ahead and answer it. So there was a question about conifer seed collection and whether the Forest Service is planning seed collection operations in these national forests. Are you using the climate adapted seed tool and or migrating seed from Mexico or other regions based on future climate models? Go ahead, Sarah.
For the first part of that question, across the forests of Southern California, the silviculture and the forest staff have ongoing efforts every year to monitor seed crops, depending on interannual variability and year-to-year conditions. And when there is a good seed crop, they do make efforts to conduct seed collections. That is a year-to-year ongoing effort that our success fluctuates to a degree, based on staff availability. Doing a successful seed collection involves a little bit of luck, but it is part of our routine program across all 4 forests. So we do have stores of recently collected seeds that are in storage and available for reforestation use. And then the reference to the climate adapted, the seed selection tool, that is a really useful online tool that that all managers are being encouraged to use as they're designing reforestation projects. And it includes the ability to project climate into the future for particular locations. So if you have a reforestation site, you can look at future climate. And then based on the projections, the tool guides you to what local seed collections have already been done that would potentially do well under those projected climate conditions. And so we're being encouraged to use the tool just routinely in development of all of our reforestation efforts. So yes, that tool is being used. And then for the reference to seed from Baja, we are keenly interested in this region in finding more sources of seed that could be potentially adapted to the future climate conditions that are coming. And our main challenge in Southern California is that generally when you're doing that, either you go lower in elevation or you move to the south. And I'm in San Diego County, hard up against that international boundary. But we know that our ecoregion extends to the south of the international boundary. And so, yes, we are very interested in exploring the potential climate adapted genetics that exist in Baja. It's something that is understudied. Not much work has been done in this area at all. And so there is a lot of interest in at least giving it a try and doing it in a careful and experimental way. So to the degree that we have the opportunities to see if some of these seed sources could be good in our region, yes, we are hoping to advance that work.
Great. It looks like we've answered the questions we have thus far. If other folks have questions, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box. But before we answer anything else, I would love to hear more from you all about, based on what you heard, or if you knew more about the strategy when you came to this webinar. What do you think about how you might anticipate using it in the near future? Or, what do you hope if you do try to use it, what do you hope it might get for you? So we have just 3 short questions for you in that Mentimeter again. Amber's going to put the link in the chat for us. So if you can just click on that link, and actually I can share the I can share this. If you joined us a little bit late, we had 3 questions in the beginning, and then what you would see next is just this placeholder slide. So if you went back to the Mentimeter, where we want you to start is here. Oh, and some people are already on it. So how do you envision using the strategy in the coming year? And then we have 2 additional questions. So there's also instructions at the top of the slide here. You can use the link Amber dropped, or you can just go to menti.com and type this code in. She's been putting the code in the chat as well. I'll give you all a chance to answer that. And Sarah, maybe while they're answering, we can go through those final slides as sort of what we're doing next, and then come back and check this out in the last minute. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Okay. And, just one thing I thought about as we were answering some of the questions is, things like the mapping framework or the adaptation strategy, or even the piece that Nicole talked about. These are really first steps. It's to help you have that conversation with then all the partners and collaborators that you're working with. So we're hoping that that is really an important part, and that we're providing these important first steps to help give you some pieces to then discuss and move forward on to decide what you're doing. So Sarah, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. Just in terms of a little bit of summary, the co-leads of the Southern Montane Forest Project, we largely come from the manager and agency and university realm. And so the niche that we have found with this project is to use our expertise to pull together recommendations from adaptation science that could be useful and relevant to this region, and then to use that to plug it into some of those main efforts that are going on in our region to inform regional prioritization planning. But throughout those phases of the project, we have known that implementation is really what we are aiming for. And so if you click forward, Megan, so at this point in the project, now that the conservation strategy is out in the world, now we are really pivoting to the next phase of the project. And that is really focused on capturing the opportunities and the funding that is out there, bringing it to Southern California, and then applying it using the pieces of the strategy to help push forward some of the most critical and strategic projects in the region. So we've, under applications here, we've listed just a few of the major projects that we're currently engaged in, but over the next few years, we're going to be continuing to do this. And I just want to stress that the strategy isn't something that we developed and now we're putting it out there and expecting others to just carry the baton. The leaders of the Southern Montane Forest Project are committed to sustained engagement to assist managers with pushing things forward in Southern California. And that's one of the strengths of this project. Next slide. And maybe I'll just finish by acknowledging that management in forests is complex. And what we're trying to do, which is focused on maintaining biodiversity, maintaining the ecosystem and the resource that exists, is a really complex endeavor. And we know that we are not going to be able to do it without paying attention to a lot of different pieces. And that includes taking care of our partnerships, working with Indigenous communities, maintaining a strong focus on climate, and really pushing to advance the things that we know need to happen in our forests, things like prescribed burning, advancing the reintroduction of cultural burning across the landscape. Without paying attention to all of these pieces, we'll be less likely to be successful in our endeavor. So I just would like to acknowledge that the collaborative vision here has a lot of different components, but we are hoping to bit by bit push forward the whole as we seek to hang on to forest resilience into the future.
Thanks, Sarah. We are at time. So as we say goodbye to you, I'm just going to share what you told us about who's interested in trying to use this. If this is you, if any of these folks, any of these numbers of being highly likely or moderately likely to want to try this out, please reach out to us. We are here to help. As Sarah said, this isn't just sink or swim. So feel free to reach out. We're very interested in not only helping you, but learning from your experiences so we can make the strategy better. And we will take this, what are you hoping the strategy can do for you? We will take this kind of information back as we revisit, and as well as, what are some more things that you would like to see, or how can we make this more applicable and accessible? Again, this is not a final product. And so we thank you all, for those of you in particular who have invested time and energy in collaborating with us to get this far. That word cloud Sarah shared is from all of the input we've received over the last 4 years. And we're looking forward to continuing that in the year to come. So thank you all so much for your time. And this will be available to share after the fact. We'll post it on the website that Amber has been sharing as we go. So thank you all so much.